And our first item on the agenda is the approval of the April 7th, 2021 minutes, of which copies were sent out to you for your review. And so I'll give you a few seconds to look through those, make any suggestions for corrections, additions, deletions. Thank you, Gail, by the way, for doing those so quickly.
Motion to approve is presented.
We have a motion to approve as presented. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second, Nancy. Any final comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone. So the next item on the agenda is the yearly TIF excess notification letter that we send out to the taxing unit. And so we've done that every year since the formation of the commission. And so are there any questions before I think we vote to approve the letter and send it out? And by the way, we have Matt Ackerley of Baker Tilly here with us for a presentation, and at this particular time, if there was a question on the excess letter, he could deal with that. But it essentially says that we are collecting all the taxes for the TIF. So, a motion to approve the excess notification letter as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the excess.
Motion by Sandy, a second.
Second.
Second by Lisa. Final comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I'll sign those, Shannon, and whenever you have them, we'll send them out. Okay. So our third item on the agenda is Matt Ackerley of Baker Tilly, and we brought Matt here just to kind of review some information on our TIF. We've had lots of discussions within the community of TIF and residential TIF, and so we have a resource tonight that we can talk with, ask questions about, get some information that will be very important for us in the future this year. And so, thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here tonight. It's nice to see everyone. As Joe was saying, he reached out, was the end of last year, beginning of this year, and said that it was the city's desire to just get an update on where the TIF area stands, how it's operating, what kind of revenues you can expect this year and beyond. And that's a common request we get from clients all over the state. So, and we prepare a similar update for the County Redevelopment Commission each year. So we tackled that looking at your area based on what's in the ground now. This analysis is based on your 2021 assessed values, 2021 tax rate, estimating, okay, here's where we think your revenues are going to be this year, where they're going to be for the next several years. And I'm going to keep it high level, but I'm happy to get into details if anyone would like of calculations and whatnot. I don't have all of the backup materials for the specific composition of the area, which specific parcels are driving the increment available. But if that's something that people are interested in, I'm happy to follow up with that after the fact. One of the hazards of working from home is I can't just shoot a bunch of documents to the printer and print them out, have to be selective, and it's just one of those things. It's going to be in the past here before long. But I also understand from my conversations with Joe that there are some more specific questions, not necessarily related to this analysis, but TIF concepts, you mentioned residential TIF, things of that nature, I'm happy to address any of those to the best of my abilities after I run through this overview. So just to start on page 2 of this analysis, I mean, this really tells the story of your TIF area as it stands right now. It, as you're all aware, straddles incorporated City of Delphi and unincorporated Deer Creek Township. And there has been new development in both spots that's generating incremental assessed value, that the taxes from that incremental assessed value are generating your tax increment revenues. In Deer Creek Township, you're looking at about $2,000 a year in TIF. And in the City of Delphi, we're estimating around $19,000 this year in increment, going up to about $22,000 a year. And that's as, and if you look at page 4, you'll see there are 3 parcels in the City of Delphi component of your TIF area that have property tax abatements, that as those property tax abatements peel off, as that assessed value phases in towards more full assessment and taxation, that's going to generate a little bit more in incremental revenue. So you're looking at around $21,000 in TIF this year, growing to about $24,000 a year moving forward. Now, we've shown 15 years of quote-unquote life on the TIF area as it stands here. Your area was established after July 1 of 2008. So what that means is that by law, the term of the area is 25 years from the date that the first obligation payable from TIF is incurred. And you haven't issued any obligations payable from TIF, so at this point in time, you don't have a clock ticking, so to speak. But if you were to enter into some sort of a loan arrangement, a lease, a bond issue payable from TIF, then that would trigger the start of that time period. Now, the Redevelopment Commission could act at any time to terminate the area if it's determined that, you know, it's served its purpose, it's run its course. We can terminate it, and at that point in time, the assessed value that's being captured will be returned to the property tax base. Well, not returned, will be added to the property tax base of the overlapping taxing units, since it was never part of the tax base to begin with, and you would no longer collect tax increment revenues. We also included on page 5 a history of the revenue collections that you had going back to the first revenue year. So over the life of the TIF area, you collected, what was that, 10, 22, about $42,000 in tax increment revenues. I'm happy to answer any specific, broad, anything in between questions that you might have about TIF, this analysis. Since you don't have bonds or other obligations, there's not a lot to go into on that front. I would say that this revenue stream as it stands now, you're not going to be looking at a significant bond issue that could be funded from something like this, but this is a revenue stream that could certainly supplement other revenue sources on financing. It's a revenue stream also that lends itself well to pay-as-you-go projects as you identify project priorities and seek out appropriate ways to deploy these funds. You have to keep in mind when you're contemplating the expenditure of TIF revenues that those expenditures need to be capital in nature. So, infrastructure, site development costs for development, just has to be capital. It also has to be in serving or benefiting the TIF area. So you have to keep that in mind. There are geographic restrictions. You have to draw a direct nexus of the project you're funding. If it sits outside the TIF area, you have to draw a direct nexus between that project and how it would benefit the geography of the TIF area. And also that project needs to be in the economic development plan for the area, which was adopted when you established the area. Now, if it's not currently in the economic development plan, you can always amend the economic development plan. It's a public process, requires a public hearing to add those projects. It's a very similar process to if you were to amend the boundaries of the area as well. So there's a fair amount of flexibility that's available with the tool, but it's not flexibility that's done, in the proverbial back room. It's a public process. You have to have public meetings to affect these types of changes, and then if you were to spend these dollars, you'd be making those determinations in public meetings as well.
So this this growth level to 2035 is a no-growth scenario, right?
It's based on what's in the ground now.
Essentially, right.
Yeah, now if there's new developments that come on down the line, that would certainly improve the outlook here. But, I mean, there's also on the flip side, if there were demolitions, something were to happen on, to remove improvements, you know, that could work against your revenue collection goals as well.
So an income stream of $25,000 a year in the current environment, so what kind of a bond can you fund with that kind of?
Well, the challenge becomes, you know, TIF by itself is not the most attractive security source for bond issue unless you have a large, diverse, well-established TIF generating dollars. You're going to need to have what we call revenue coverage levels that get an investor comfortable with the risk of potential decreases in the revenues. So if you're looking at $24,000 a year in annual revenues, you would think you could support payments of about half that, or maybe a little bit less. So you're really looking at being able to leverage $12,000 a year to make the bond payments. Now, if you put a property tax backup behind it, and we've talked about this concept with the county's TIF bonds have a property tax backup. When we were talking about the jail project last year, that was being contemplated with the property tax backup. What that tells investors is that if the TIF revenues fall short, you're putting your taxing power, the city's taxing power behind it. You'll levy a property tax to make whole for whatever the TIF shortfall would be. So you could maybe leverage in that scenario $18,000 a year. Money is very cheap right now. It's a great time to borrow money, but still looking at $18,000 a year, that's not going to generate a very, you know, when you look at the costs associated with a bond issue, it's not the most efficient way.
$1,500 payment.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately. Now, if you package it with other revenue sources, then you might be able to get a little bit more value out of the TIF area. Some communities have issued income tax or property tax bonds to support projects, and in lieu of using those income taxes or levying the full property tax, they've offset that with TIF revenues. So you can kind of get to the same place, but the security that the market's looking at is that more stable, more established revenue stream.
So can you be a participant in a bond, like with the city, with the public entity, with the RDC, and then that would be your contribution?
Certainly, certainly, yeah. It's you have those geographic and economic development plan restrictions in the bond world too. But if you wanted to support a city project that's ostensibly using another revenue source, TIF could definitely be a piece of that puzzle.
So I know that residential TIF is very new in the state of Indiana, right? So what have you seen with an establishment of a residential TIF in relationship to a regular TIF? Does a regular TIF set up a residential TIF and administer it along with the regular TIF, or does somebody else?
You can handle a residential TIF in concert with what we call it like a normal TIF or a traditional TIF. We've seen that. We've also seen some circumstances where the residential TIF is pursued independently. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the residential TIF, the strength of the traditional TIF and how it might be able to support what you're trying to accomplish with the residential TIF. It really, there's no common way because it is so new. It's just kind of on a project-specific basis, evaluating how do these potentially fit together? Do they work well together? Do they work better independently? The residential TIF has to be established independent of the traditional TIF. It has to be its own allocation area, separate geography. You can't overlap because of the rules governing a residential TIF, but that doesn't mean that you can't set it up and develop your economic development plans in a way to allow them to support one another.
So can it touch but not overlap?
Yeah, they can be adjacent, but you can't overlap.
Okay.
So that you just have to kind of look at the geography, and maybe the residential TIF, you know, if you're contemplating one, maybe some of those parcels are currently in your existing traditional TIF area, and if that were the circumstance traditional area,
to,
remove and then add those parcels to their own area.
and so they're unrelated in a sense, they don't have to have a nexus.
They don't. When you want to have the nexus is if you were trying to use the existing, the traditional TIF, as maybe some financial support for the residential TIF. You know, it could play the bank, so to speak. You could front some of the costs from the traditional TIF funds that are available, and then reimburse those expenditures from future residential TIF revenues. You could also, front some of those types of expenditures from other city funds like your income tax revenues, and reimburse yourselves from future TIF revenues as well. The only reason you'd want to have a nexus between the two is if you were trying to use one to support the other.
So, anybody else have any questions for Matt? I have a couple more that we'll continue talking about just a little. So we have at least 3 projects that may involve the city because it's utilities, right, and water and that kind of thing, and then public money and then private money. So are we kind of like, a project like that, would we be the lead on the documents that an attorney would draw up to make sure that each of the entities pays and how that sets up?
It really depends on, which entity, whether that be the civil city, the redevelopment commission, or even the private entity kind of wants to be the lead on that. The redevelopment commission, utilizing TIF, could certainly be the leaders on building that structure. It really comes more down to local policy and preference than anything.
The city would have more capability than us in the sense of resources, and then also drawing in the expertise they need because they've done it so much more.
Sure, in the sense of available financial resources, certainly. Now, one thing to think about, and I'm not a lawyer, so you want to consult with your attorneys on this, is redevelopment commissions are afforded some powers under Indiana code that allow for a little more flexibility in terms of acquisition and disposition of land, spending on projects, things like that, where it might be more advantageous to run a project through the redevelopment commission. But that would be something where you'd sit down and think about, okay, here's the type of project we're trying to get done, and then consult with the lawyers to figure out, from a legal perspective and understanding what your goals are, is it more advantageous to run this through the RDC, the city, or even let the private entity have the lead? And then, our role would be providing kind of the financial perspective on, okay, if it flows through here, if it flows through here, if it flows through here, here's the resources and how they could be deployed. But that gets a little bit more into legal nuance when you're really contemplating how to pursue those types of projects.
Any other questions? Yeah. Any? So we just want, just trying to get a feel for what is coming down the pike. That's why we asked you to come. So we appreciate that. Anita, do you have any?
I think we see the need in fairly short order for residential too in the Delphi area. And, I've identified the preliminary parcel list of about 30 parcels, a few of which overlap, and so we would, but only a few, very few actually. So I think one of the questions that I would have, and whether it's the Delphi RDC or the Carroll County RDC with the assistance of the Economic Development Corporation, we need to move fairly quickly due to some timelines on property that is likely to go to auction this fall. And so, do you have a feel for what the most expeditious process would be?
Well, you know, if it's in the city of Delphi, you know, just from a procedural standpoint, then, you know, it naturally falls to the City Redevelopment Commission. You could certainly cede jurisdiction to the County Redevelopment Commission, but then they won't have to accept that, so you have to go through all of that.
There are two parcels that are in the county.
Okay, well, so even if you have to go a little bit outside of the county, you could do what happened with the establishment of the original area, which is have the county grant jurisdiction, for you to go outside your corporate limits, so that's part of it. What I would really recommend is getting, the lawyers engaged right away, because then we could work with them to map out a timeline to not only, get that area established, because it is a more robust process to do a residential TIF. It requires some additional community engagement. The school corporation has to adopt a resolution approving it. So there's just more effort involved, and it's more legal effort than anything. So you want to map that out as quickly as possible, and then they can also provide advice on, you know, if the city's looking to acquire the land, how to set that up and execute that as expeditiously as possible.
And I'm not sure that that's the case, but, you know, we're in an opportunity zone with these proposals as well, so, you know, we're looking at pulling together a coalition of
Sure.
public-private partnership probably, and perhaps an opportunity fund. You know, we don't have the mix tied down by any, you know, stretch of the imagination yet, but we just know that we need to be going full bore.
Sure.
To make sure we have the pieces in place.
Yeah, and opportunity zones are they're unique, they're still relatively new. I was telling them before the meeting started, I personally don't do much with opportunity zones, but I have partners who do opportunity zoning and market tax credits nationwide. And that even includes, you know, seeking out investors from opportunity funds and things like that. So if that's something where there needs to be serious looks at those, I can bring in some resources as support.
You probably, you know, part of that road already.
Yes, Matt charges by the hour, so I'm trying to take it easy on him. No, yes, we plan to, engage in the finance if we start with Baker Tilly and Woodland.
And, that way we've got some number on the establishment of the.
With Ray. He's on vacation, so he'll be back next week.
Well, he'll be rested.
Yes, he'll be ready.
Thank you, Matt. Final question, so, under item number 4, other business, Jake from the EDC asked me if he could have a moment to introduce a guest that he has and give preliminary input on some potential development that's coming, possibly. So I thought we could do that this evening a bit. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you, and I apologize for to have this on the agenda, the timing just didn't fit, so I appreciate the opportunity. So unique setup we have, and tonight I'm not here to ask for anything. I just want to give a 30,000 foot view of what the EDC is working on for the city of Delphi, and that we would be looking at possible help and support for a project and within the corporate limits, and it would fall within the redevelopment commission as well, and some of those parameters. So first of all, we have a project that we're working with right now that's looking at the city of Delphi for an investment. The total right now is approximately $4 million in residential development for the city of Delphi. Currently, the project has a purchase agreement that's been accepted on the property, approximately 23 acres in town, and there are some contingencies with that offer. And really, the EDC's role in the project is to make sure those resources are and those contingencies are looked at and vetted through. And one of those is just making sure that there's proper infrastructure on the site. That's roadway as well, city street, as well as wastewater, drinking water, electrical, all the basics that make a project go.
And so, being that it's unique, we typically do this on the industrial scale and a larger scale. This is just the same as that would be, but more so on the residential side, being a focus for the Economic Development Corporation. So, what I really wanted to do
So you saw that our resources are not unlimited, right?
Yep.
So,
My timing.
so just to understand that, how we participate is reflective of the resources that we currently have and would have in the future. And so we're not like the county RDC in that regard, who has more resources than we do. So that's just so upfront, you know, that we're kind of poor.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, we plan to go and speak with the city of Delphi and move forward with just the public engagement to this piece to see how we can find a good solution, because the site is, by nature, is landlocked and it doesn't have street access, Area 4. We have not executed a search on utilities yet. That'll be one step that I wanted to engage you guys with first, to make sure that this is something you're interested in working with, whether it be financially or it's a supportive letter to the city of Delphi for the project. And so we want to begin that work at figuring out where those utilities are, what that extenuating cost is going to be to get them there, street access, and kind of bring that information back to you guys. So that would be the goal, is part of what we get paid really to do, is to vet those things out. So we don't really know what that is, what that ask is. So, but the area that we are looking at, I want to press the importance of, is an area where we will not likely see investment necessarily come around all the time. The mere fact that it's in an opportunity zone, and the investor in this case, Mark Hammond, the principal, is using an opportunity fund to forward his investment into our community. So Mark's no stranger to investing into Delphi. He's owned a business here for over a decade, spent millions in payroll for our community, has hired thousands probably of folks and employed them in our community. So he's utilizing the opportunity fund to invest right here into Delphi. And so I want us to really begin to think about what the Redevelopment Commission could do to make this a realistic investment for him to make it realized. We have till October before the purchase agreement has matured, and we want to try to get those infrastructure questions answered, and cost, because there is going to be cost. But I feel that we as a public entity, as you guys as a public entity, should look at how we get access to that site, because I think just the original investment itself is just really the first phase to this project. It is 23 acres, so what we're initially looking at and working with Mark on is just the first piece of that. So the street access utilities is only going to be a future investment. So it's along the trails. We've talked about enhancing the trails, providing connectivity through this development project, a park that's connected to this area as well, so that we're able to make sure we're not just popping up multifamily units, but we're actually ingraining into what we already have in our community to make it pleasing to look at, pleasing to live, and an integral part of the community as well. So Mark is here to answer any questions after the meeting. If you guys were to have any direct question with him, the goal wasn't to sort of stand anybody up and ask for anything, but just to say we're working on this project at an EDC. It is a priority for us, and so as I may reach out to you one-on-one, and then also for future public meetings, we're going to be engaged in closing the gap between that investment and the public as well. Any
So you're looking at a 23-acre piece of land that's currently landlocked. Is it in the corporate limits?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and you're not going to share where that is?
I'm not at this time, no.
Okay. And what is the intent for this piece of land? What's the development intent?
Residential.
Can you give us some idea of what type?
Yeah, the initial investment is looking at multifamily units.
Jacob, if I can help, pardon me for interrupting. So this project is somewhat fluid, and in recent conversations that we've had with our attorney about the opportunity zone investment rules, it's kind of changed a little bit now. So the parcel will be partially purchased by the opportunity zone fund,
and my wife and I are gonna make a personal investment in at least half of the property, with the idea of, the basic concept is, with roughly 22 acres, to build a multi-family townhomes, so the upscale townhomes that we want to build. I don't need 22 acres to do that. And so there's a lot of single-family home sites that could easily be developed, utilize the cost of the infrastructure that would be put in, and then add additional properties to the property tax rolls. So the properties that my wife and I are buying will be the single-family home sites, and will have to be developed. But I personally will begin the building process of them. We'll put them for sale if another builder is interested in building in that area. Obviously, it'll have to fit some sort of a rule structure. But I will begin, probably building, 1, 2 at a time until said properties would be filled up. But I would guess, with the 22 acres, that they're likely, would be somewhere around 15 home sites. I'm not sure what the minimum lot size is, and there's a lot of things that have to be determined yet, but there'll be a number of homes. It could be, probably somewhere between 15 to 20 homes that would be incorporated with the multifamily units, but it's really not.
And are these gonna be similar to what you proposed to the APC?
The multifamily will be, yes.
Are you gonna be,
very similar.
are you gonna be pursuing any type of zoning variance on this property or anything, or is it currently zoned for what you want?
We'll be pursuing zoning.
A variance
I believe there will just
or a
be-
special exception? Are you-
I don't think anything will go to the BZA. Don't quote me on that, but it's my understanding it's just the APC for what we need it for. So we're gonna try to fit it within the parameters, so we're not seeking special, those regulatory pieces are in place to protect. So if we can get it within the bounds of just the use plan, then that's what we wanna do. But it doesn't rule out that we would be seeing the BZA if the plans and the architecture and the engineering and everything. That's a good question.
Is this, a site that will be, or is it currently under any TIF guidelines? Cause I thought from previous reading, I know this is all new with the residential TIF, but some of that money, if it is tipped up for residential TIF, that goes to reimburse like the infrastructure that is, put into this site. Like if the city has to come alongside and fund some things for infrastructure, it was my understanding that residential TIF money can go back to reimburse some of that. So is there any intention to TIF this site, or is it currently under?
Yeah, as it sits with the TIF, you guys are the regulatory body for that, so when it comes to the project, if that's something that this body wants to adopt as a residential TIF area, then I think you would find it to be favorable, in a sense, if I were to just give my opinion on it to the redevelopment commission, is this might be an area you would think about designating as a residential TIF area due to the influx of AD, because you're not gonna capture that under the original designation of your TIF. So, yeah, I think it would be wise, as advisement goes. But certainly, when it comes to utilizing this investment and engaging RDC, it would be just to, if there was borrowing, if there needed to be borrowing, if there needed to be bonding, how much would that be? We're gonna work on all those numbers and how much we're gonna, what is it gonna look like to get this project through? And maybe, we don't wanna speculate on the scope. So, but yes, I would think that there would be some kind of participation I would want there to be participation from the RDC and the city of Delphi combined if need be. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yes, it did. What's your timeline?
We have till really October till the purchase agreement matures, so as quickly as possible. So we have a lot of site work we need to do on the ED season to find out where the infrastructure is, and contact our utilities, get a hold, contact the city of Delphi and get all that under wrapped, and then kind of look at costs to. It might be on site, be right in the middle of the site. We don't know. So those are the things when you're greenfield, you don't know.
That's the investment that we're making as an opportunity zone investment. So that's realized from the capital gain of the sale of our business that we sold in January. However, if you include the single-family home sites and, you know, the average cost of a 3-bed, 2-bath home, if it was around the $200,000 level, that bumps this project up to closer to 10 million. So,
Yeah, and that's a good point. So what we try to do as the EDC is look at how we can leverage private or public dollars into private investment. That's what we do. It's what we do best. It's what we do best. And we're always cautious about how much public dollars get us those private dollars back, right? We don't want to spend X and get Y and not get the return. But an investment the size of this, just basically looking at it, our goal is to get the infrastructure cost in a relative figure that's manageable for the investor themselves, but makes the public entity feel comfortable in X number is a great number, and then we're gonna have the financial experts show us that if that investment is realized, what the long-term impact of that is. I mean, you know, the goal would be to be millions in tax revenue back to our, you know, our community, and that small capital up front was what was able to get it done. So that's the goal, is to get those numbers so you guys can have a good, clear picture of what you're looking at, make sure it's worthwhile. Obviously, we're excited to have a residential project of this magnitude, and we're fortunate to have it in our community. We just gotta work out the details. We gotta figure out where it's at, what it's gonna take, and hopefully, by October, we have all those details at least ironed out and we're moving forward.
We're not afraid to discuss. So whatever, bring, don't be afraid to bring it to us. We're not afraid to consider and discuss.
I guess I'm more the second step, and hoping that you've had good communications with the mayor and utilities with the city on, what's available.
We're very, very early in this, because the goal is to be as transparent as possible. So we want folks to know that it's coming. I mean, the property is obviously being in contingency to offer. It does make it competitive space, right? And we have to be sensitive to that. I think hopefully that's respected, the fact that it is an investment that needs to be somewhat protected. But the process in itself and the public engagement, all that will come out. I mean, it's not, you won't have to make, we'll never make a decision on anything that you're not gonna know every detail that you wanna know about. So we're just early right now, and we're trying to make sure we get our feet under us, get the infrastructure first, figure out what that's gonna look like, and then, more than likely within the next 30 days, we'll know where it's at and how much we're looking at, and what can we do as a community to help bring this investment home.
Is the EDC the player in the purchase agreement with the landowner?
Is the EDC
Yeah,
negative?
so who is, obviously the landowner is the player in the purchase agreement, who's the other?
So it'd just be the principal investor, the buyer, and the seller are within the agreement.
Yep. We are a facilitation that's paid by the city of Delphi to render these services, and so this is right where we need to be.
Yeah, thank you.
The city has had some preliminary eyes on parts of the infrastructure. So, and we're already beginning to look at, you know, what's there or close, in close proximity, so.
It's exciting, residential growth here is exciting, but, you know, this, having our local residents to invest that kind of money, back into the city and the county, that ranks right up there with having our young folks come back and invest and work here too, so, that's awesome.
Thank you, Jay.
Any other? Feel free, you guys have my cell phone number, of course, call me, we'll set up a meeting, whatever I can do to help facilitate communication, as we move forward with this, but more likely you'll be seeing me again soon. Thank you.
So one final thing, another business was the next meeting. And so we've kind of been doing this third Wednesday. In June, we have some people who are interested in presenting to us with projects. And so I told them we were busy this month, but that we would be available for them to come in June, that's the show and stop. Shrine people wanna come and present, the canal may wanna come and present, we may have some, and so, what do you think about a June meeting? Right, that would be, so it would be the 16th if we did the third Wednesday of June, is that a problem for you?
Works for me, Bible school's the next week, so don't be
Don't
conflicted.
do that. So we had 16th, 5:30 on the 16th of June.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
I'm typically out of town on Wednesday, on that third Wednesday, but I'll make exceptions.
okay. Mayor, is that an okay thing for you?
Texted, what was the date?
The 16th, 5:30.
Looks good.
Okay. So, it's official, we have a date of June 16th, put in your calendar on that third Wednesday of June for our next RDC meeting. Any other business to come before the commission before adjournment?
I have a question for Matt. Any new investment, let's say bare ground in the existing TIF area, anything new that goes up, probably we're not gonna see until 2 or 3 years before you would see any kind of tax from that.
Yeah, because Indiana property tax is being paid in arrears, so if it goes up this year, it gets assessed January 1 of '22, and then it starts paying taxes in 2023, so you got a lag there.
How about existing, businesses? We went through this when we established this which was 50-50, it was either a good thing or 50-50 a bad thing, when we had the devaluation of Globe and Peters and Remington, just because of what happened there. But they're productive properties now, and there's something going on there, but how about reassessing or any kind of development that happens in existing facilities?
That's on the same timeline. I mean, all assessments happen theoretically as of January 1. What I see, and I can't speak specifically to Carroll County, but sometimes with improvements to existing buildings, I hate to paint with a broad brush here, but sometimes assessors kind of prioritize those a little bit lower. So you might go a longer time unless you call specific attention to it before those get what some people would think are fully assessed. I've seen that around the state. I mean, most assessors are right on top of it, but sometimes the existing ones that do improvements that could generate additional value, they get kind of hit the back of the line.
Have a motion to adjourn? Nobody wants to
So
go home? A second? Lisa, a second.
Matt, thanks for
Hey, thanks for having me. It was great to see everyone.
Thank you, Matt.
Give card before you bring it out.
Bake sale, just so that we can afford it.
See a lot of tell me.
I think it might take me.
That's what we want. Big sale for the commission.
Coming at you, coming at you.
I just haven't been to a lot of meetings since the beginning of the year, and everyone's doing it virtually. It's nice to be seen.
You guys are done.
Oh, sorry. Oh, were you with him and Jason? I think it was Friday, because Doug and Jason.
It was Friday.
Yeah, they were on a call